Brian, this phrase saved my marriage. One of the best pieces of advice I can give you is this. Stop ignoring the direction of your marriage, because your marriage is headed in a direction, whether you realize it or not. Every time we let fights go unrepaired, every time we want to say something that we feel hurt or alone or neglected, but we choose to stay silent, we're the opposite. We've built up so much bitterness and resentment towards them. We don't stay silent anymore. No. Now we blow everything out of proportion. We blow up over something small. We blame them, we criticize them, we attack them. Or on the other side, our spouse comes to us with a complaint, and all we do is feel attacked. So we make excuses, we get defensive, or we dismiss them. That affects the direction of your relationship every single time. And every spouse wants to have a relationship filled with connection and respect and passion. Very few know the paths it takes to achieve one. Few marriages end due to an abundance of friendship and intimacy and reciprocation and consideration and vulnerability and deep trust and healthy conflict resolution. Millions of marriages die due to a lack of those things. And that's simply because your marriage is headed in a direction. Whether you're steering the ship or not, it doesn't matter. It's going somewhere. Where is yours headed? And after my wife and I were in counseling for a while, it finally dawned on me, wait, I can pay attention to the direction of this marriage. I mean, up until then, we would just have the same fights over and over again. We would get stuck in the same destructive cycles. One spouse felt hurt or invalidated, so they would approach the other, sometimes in a healthy way, sometimes with a little too much resentment or passive aggressiveness or criticism and blame, which would cause the other person to feel attacked. They would immediately get defensive, make excuses, dismiss that spouse. You're too needy, you're too sensitive, your feelings aren't my responsibility, which only leaves that other spouse feeling more unheard and more alone and more unrepaired than before, which means more resentment, more hopelessness, more negativity in the relationship. Anyone else having that dynamic, and after counseling and reading Sue Johnson's book, Hold Me Tight, which I highly recommend, I was like, oh, we don't have to do this anymore. We might be making subconscious choices here, but it's still a choice, and it needs to be brought out into the light for everybody to see. So the phrase I want us all to learn is this. This affects the direction of our marriage. Go ahead, wherever you are. I know this is extremely embarrassing, but we're all going to say this out loud. It might be the first time that you've ever heard these words out loud. Ready? Here we go. This affects the direction of our marriage. Because it does. And it's embarrassing for me to admit this, but I didn't know that. I didn't know unrepaired conflict led somewhere. Criticism and blame and shame, although they seem justified in the present, they lead somewhere. Defensiveness, dismissiveness, self-centeredness, pride, contempt, mocking each other, name-calling each other, meaning behavior, only working on your issues once they start working on theirs. It all leads somewhere. Usually more distance and disconnection and ultimately divorce. And we can all learn about what destroys marriages and what strengthens them. That information is out there. And then when we get caught in our destructive cycles of conflict, when we start creating false narratives in our head, when we start on our righteous arguments where we feel like we're the good guy and they're the bad guy, or when they respond to our calm vulnerability with dismissiveness or invalidation, we have a choice to stop and say, this isn't a neutral event. This affects the direction of our relationship. And then we have to decide, where do we want our marriage to end up? Because whatever direction you're headed, not your intentions, you can have the best intentions in the world, doesn't make a bit of difference if you aren't intentionally walking that path. And you can do all those things right. You can learn how to communicate your feelings, you can get in touch with your needs and fears and triggers and traumas. You can be on a healing path. You can learn how to practice vulnerability and empathy and consideration. You can grow in self-reflection and emotional maturity and relational intelligence. But that doesn't mean they will, does it? So what are you going to do when they continue to respond in a toxic, invalidating way? Do you continue to ask them over and over year after year? No. The moment they invalidate you and dismiss you, and that gets unrepaired, you say, this affects the direction of our marriage. And then you have to decide, do I value this marriage? Because if the answer is yes, you can't allow them to destroy it. Because they will. And there's a ton of us out there that think, well, they're destroying it, they're the problem, when in reality, we're contributing in ways that we're blind to, just like they are. And that's why counseling is so important, because They can see all of our blind spots. And you might say, well, I've asked them to go and they won't go to counseling with me. Well, guess what? That affects the direction of your marriage. What you just described, someone who doesn't listen to your hurts, who responds with anger or dismissiveness or contempt or name-calling, who isn't receptive to professional help in your marriage. The relationship you just described isn't a relationship. There's no trust. You're not a team. There's no intimacy there, is there? There's a whole lot of unresolved hurt and emotional abuse. And that's not sustainable. You might stay together, but the relationship is dying. If it's not already dead, then I absolutely believe in miracles, but it takes two for a relationship to work. You know that just as well as I do. And my goal is to catch those problems early in your marriage. You know, before you hate each other. Doesn't that sound so much better for your marriage long term? So whatever stage you're in, dating, wedding day, starting to hit a few rough patches in the early years, or maybe even decades into your marriage, make sure you're paying attention to the direction that your marriage is headed and change it in any way you can towards healthy. Thank you so much for watching. Can't wait to see you in the next one.